My name is Chris Yonker, which I think most folks probably know since you signed up for this. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce Wyatt here. I have his bio. Known as the expert on experts, Wyatt Woodsmall is able to rapidly identify and decode that critical, all-important difference that makes the difference. Wyatt started out his modeling path with Richard Bandler and John Grinder in the newly emerging field of NLP, NLP being neuro-linguistic programming. And Bandler and Grinder were actually the two founders. If you didn't know, these are the guys who created and invented NLP. And it was over 30 years ago. With the early NLP fanatical craze, a lot of disturbing trends started to emerge, which prompted Wyatt and his wife, Marilyn, to retain the integrity of the modeling approach and expand it into fields other than NLP. Then this developed into their own highly sophisticated, proprietary, advanced behavior modeling technology. Wyatt is a pioneer in applying modeling to business, sales, education, athletics, manufacturing, spirituality, and entrepreneurship, and transferring these models into powerful and effective trainings and proven tools. And I can say today, Wyatt is working side by side with folks in all sorts of industries. And one of the things it doesn't say here in the bio about Wyatt is he's got a very high, this guy's got a very high level of integrity. Extremely, he and his wife Marilyn are probably the smartest people I've ever met in my life. Very, very, very intelligent, but with and what they understand and know is it's got a lot of power to it, quite frankly, and it requires a lot of responsibility. So they have a very high ethical code into what it is that they do. But some interesting things about Wyatt is when Anthony Robbins was getting started, Tony Robbins, Wyatt worked with Tony. He's also worked with the U.S. military. He's also worked with the U.S. diving team. I mean, all sorts of creating anything really tied to where someone's got to optimize behavior or replicate behavior. Wyatt's probably one of maybe if not one of the living worldwide experts on that topic. So I'm super thrilled and excited to be here, Wyatt, with you, and thank you for offering an hour of your life to spend with us.
Thank you, Chris.
So I'm going to just talk about why we're here and how this got tabled up. Fear and uncertainty is not a new thing. Dealing with our emotions is not new. We're all humans. But we're in a time right now where the level of fear and uncertainty is probably a lot higher than most people have ever experienced in their lifetimes. And I have a good friend of mine who's a doctor, and in fact, he said, you know, you really should do some type of a session in regards to fear and uncertainty because people really need a lot of peace. And this guy is a respiratory and immunology doctor, actually. And not only that, he and his wife got COVID, and she actually almost passed away. And so there's layers of impact on this. And quite frankly, one of the things I've learned from working with Wyatt is we all really are creating our own reality, whether we realize it or not. Our experience that we have right now today, this experience that we hold, well, it comes out of our beliefs and our paradigms. And once we understand some of this, we actually have control into learning how to change how we think, how we feel, and ultimately how we behave. And one of my concerns is that there's a lot of our beliefs get formulated without really our conscious thought. And there's two ways that belief can sometimes or usually be created. One of those is a sudden emotional impact event. And another one is repetition of the similar information over and over. And we've got both of those right now in the world that we're in. So what my ultimate objective would be is to help empower folks that are here to understand that you can be an agent for yourself in relationship to changing a bit of how you feel and how you look at things. And also, if you're dealing with any level of anxiety, any level of fear, let's talk a little bit about what can you do about that outside of how most folks are managing it. Now, I'm an avid meditator, and I didn't even know that just recently the founder, one of the guys behind TM, or Transcendental Meditation, is actually doing some type of work with the frontline workers. And this is all really good, great stuff. But the challenge is that, you know, we're running, we're working out, we're meditating, alcohol sales are up like, I was reading the other day, like 30% in many categories, except for, quite frankly, Corona beer is down. That was interesting to note. But regardless, folks are doing something to kind of numb themselves or tune themselves down. But to me, they're not really dealing with the underlying cause of what's creating and driving the behavior, which kind of led to like, boy, if Wyatt would be willing to spend some time with us, I'd love to have some conversation around very specifically this particular topic. So with that all being said, Wyatt, can you talk a little bit about, you know, really what is fear? Where does it come from? What is anxiety? Where does it come from? And a little bit to better understand that.
Okay, great, Chris. So first, the difference between fear and anxiety is fear is specific and anxiety is generalized. So we fear specific things like that we might get coronavirus, whereas anxiety is generalized, and it's like all sorts of things can happen to us and all sorts of things can happen to the world, and we don't know what's happening in the world. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's going. And so then we're just in this anxiety. We're anxious continually because we're living in a state in which we simply don't know what's happening. We're programmed very well. If we know what a specific threat is, we can begin to be prepared to deal with that. But if we don't know what the threat is, then that creates generalized anxiety. And anxiety begins to have adverse effects on us. It affects our health. It affects our well-being. We end up not making good decisions, and we may end up not making any decisions. And so that's a little bit about the difference between fear and anxiety. Now, fear and anxiety are emotions, and emotions come and go and change. And that's the healthy way it should be. But if we get stuck in one emotion, then we call it a mood. So a mood is an emotion that extends for a period of time. And according to the DSM-5, which is the diagnostics manual of the psychiatric profession, that if you've got moods become mental illnesses. So chronic anxiety, chronic fear, chronic depression, all of these things are listed in DSM-5 as mental illnesses. So this then becomes a challenge. So the good news is that we can do something about it. So nobody really teaches us how to control our emotions. Daniel Goleman, who's the definitive researcher and wrote the books on what he calls emotional intelligence. And he says emotional intelligence consists of four things. One, we need to be able to know what emotions we're in. Two, we need to be able to control our emotions. Three, we need to be able to read other people's emotions. And four, we need to be able to influence other people's emotions. And Goleman says there's a direct correlation between emotional intelligence and success in life, and particularly in every area of life, from business to personal to social. And the challenge is that there's no school in the world where we're taught emotional intelligence. The single thing most correlated with success in life, and no school teaches it. If that's not an insane world, I don't know what is. Now then, so Goldman has got several books on emotional intelligence, and he tells you all about it, but he doesn't know how to control it. So he doesn't tell you that, which is the most important thing of all.
Well, it's important that you know about it,
Yeah,
but we're not going to worry about how to do it.
exactly. Well, the how-to, of course, is the most critical thing. And fortunately, I've got a background in as Chris talked about, in what we call modeling and in neurolinguistic programming. And modeling is like a how-to methodology. So in any case, to cut to the short of it, that you can learn how to work with and control your emotions. And the key to doing that is to understand that emotions don't come from nowhere. They don't just come out of thin air, that we actually create them. And we create them in one of three major ways. Emotions come from pictures in our head, from the tonality of our internal dialogue, and from sensations in our body. So emotions come from three places. They come from pictures in our head, the tonality of our internal dialogue, and they come from sensations in our body. And most of this is outside of our conscious awareness. And so a classic example is jealousy. So people that experience jealousy, when you say, well, where is it coming from? And they'll go, I don't know. I don't understand. It's just all of a sudden I get overwhelmed with these feelings of jealousy. Well, if you can examine then where it's actually coming from, people are making pictures in their head of their spouse or loved one with somebody else. And then they get the feelings of jealousy, but they don't see the picture. They're not aware of the picture. And so we're talking about fear. We're talking about anxiety. And these don't come out of thin air. They come because we're making a picture. We're not aware of the picture, but it's there in our unconscious, and we're continually coming back to the picture. And it's the picture that's creating the feeling. If we can change the picture or eliminate the picture, we can change the feelings. So it's interesting that most of us don't know how to deal with our feelings. And part of that is cultural. So if you ask an American Indian, and if I ask you, if I say, make a picture, change the picture, change the picture, change the picture, you can do that. So if I say, talk to yourself in a tonality, change the tonality, change the tonality, change the tonality, you can do that. But if I say, get a feeling, change the feeling, change the feeling, change the feeling, you look at me like you're crazy. How do you do that? You talk to an American Indian and you say, okay, talk to yourself in a tonality, change the tonality, change the tonality, change the tonality. Fine. Get a feeling, change the feeling, change the feeling, change the feeling. Fine. Get a picture, change the picture, change. Wait. You don't mess with pictures. Pictures come from the Great Spirit. They're visions. You don't change the pictures. So a lot of this is cultural. And so we grew up in a society where we thought we had no control over our feelings because nobody taught us how to control our feelings. And so it all begins with awareness. We have to be aware of our internal process. We need to be aware of the pictures in our head. We need to be aware of the tonality of our internal dialogue. We need to be aware of sensations in our body. And if we're not aware of these, then we can't change them and we can't control them. So the first step in any kind of self-mastery is awareness. There's no substitute for awareness. Awareness of where we are, what we call situational awareness, and then awareness of our internal states. What are the voices in our head? Not just what are they saying, but what is the tonality? What are the pictures we're making? And consciously and unconsciously, what are the sensations in our body? Because those are things we do have control over. So today we're living in a world where there's tremendous fear and anxiety. So we may be afraid that we're going to get coronavirus and die. We may know somebody that has. I personally, in December, my wife of 43 years passed away from something that would seem to be very similar to coronavirus. And that she died then, she was on a ventilator and finally her lungs filled up with fluid and she passed on. And this was before coronavirus presumably got here. And they never did figure out what was the cause of it. So I've seen somebody go through this and it was a horrible situation. So it's hard to get those pictures out of your head. It's hard to let go of the memories. And as long as the memory is there, then the pain associated with it is there. So I have incredible sympathy for anybody that has a loved one that's experiencing this. And anyone that is afraid that they're going to experience it themselves. So what keeps that anxiety, keeps that fear? It's the picture or the tonality you're talking to yourself in. Like most people are not aware of the voices in their head. Occasionally they may become aware of them, but most of the time we don't think about thinking. We don't think about what we're saying to ourselves. And we do, if we do, we think it's what we're saying that's important and not how we're saying it, because most of us are totally unaware of tonality. And so there's a voice in your head and the voice is saying something, but it's saying something in a certain tonality. And the tonality is critically important. So if you want to be angry, then talk in an angry voice. And if you talk to yourself in an angry voice long enough, then you start to get tense and you start to get angry. If you want to be depressed, talk to yourself in a depressing tone of voice about how terrible things are. Oh, I can't stand it. It's so horrible. And you'll start feeling depression. So that the tonality of your voice, which is the thing that usually people are least aware of, is one of the major ways that we create and sustain emotions. Now, there are two kinds of emotions: positive emotions and negative emotions. Positive emotions charge us. They give us energy. They're things like love, joy, peace, happiness. And then there are negative emotions. Negative emotions drain us. They take our energy. So there are things like hate, like anger, like depression, like fear, like anxiety, boredom. All of these are negative emotions. They drain us. And so what we need to learn to do, and there's no school that teaches this, which is totally insane, we need to learn to control our emotions. And we need to suppress the negative emotions. And we need to learn, which is more difficult many times, to express positive emotions. So if we want to have love, joy, hope, then we need to experience those. Any emotion you can experience in the now. And if you're not experiencing in the now, you may never experience it. So one of the things is, the reason that frequently people don't have love, joy, peace, happiness is they make it dependent on something else. They push it off in the future. Someday I'll be happy. Someday I'll meet him. Someday I'll meet her. Someday I'll be in love. Someday I'll be at peace. Someday I'll be in joy. and someday never comes. Because if you want those things, then you need to experience them now. Da Frijan, who's a Buddhist mystic, says that if you want to be happy, you've got to remember to be happy. People don't remember to be happy. They remember to be miserable, but they forget, they got horrible memories. They don't remember to be happy. So if you want to be happy, you've just got to remember to be happy. And in order to do that, then you've got to be able to create the emotion of happiness. Now, how do you do that? Once again, emotions come from pictures in our head, sensations in our body, the tonality of our internal dialogue. So what are the pictures that make you happy? What are the pictures that make you happy? And you need to have a whole repertoire of pictures that can make you happy. And you just got to remember those pictures. What is the tonality that you sound like when you're happy? What do you sound like when you're happy? What does your voice sound like? And you got to remember what that voice is and repeat that voice in your head. Or you got to feel sensations in your body. What does your body feel like when you're happy? What does your body feel like when you're at peace? What does your body feel like when you're experiencing hope or any other positive emotions? So if you want to control your emotions, then you got to do three things. One, you got to be aware of what emotion you're experiencing. Two, you got to be aware of what it is then that's causing you to experience that emotion. What is the pictures in your head, the voices in your head, the sensations in your body? And third, then you got to be able to take the negative ones that are not supporting you, and you need to get rid of them. And you can't just get rid of them, you got to replace them. That's another cardinal rule. You can't push something out of your head, but you can put something else in. You can't put something out of your mind, but you can put something else in. So you've got to then, I lost the picture here. Well, anyway, you've got to be aware then of what the pictures, sounds, feelings are you're experiencing. And if you don't want them, then you've got to put something else in. And so in order to do that, you've got to know what are the pictures that'll make you then feel the positive emotions you want to feel. What are the tonality you need to talk to yourself in? What are the sensations you need to focus on in your body? And when you do this, then you can learn to control your emotions. And so we live in an age in which we live in, there's an ancient Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. Well, we live in interesting times. So there's a couple of other aspects of this. So first is that we really don't know what's going on. So that we live in times of uncertainty. And part of the problem is that the media and everything around us is continually pumping out negative emotions, negative pictures, negative sounds, and that we're bombarded with all of this, and we're getting conflicting information. And if we're listening to the media, we're getting a lot of negative programming, and therefore it's easy to begin to feel like you're a victim and you have no control over the situation. Well, you're not a victim. And so Gurdjieff, who was one of the precursors of New Age, said that we consume 4 foods. Now he's speaking metaphorically. And so the first food is the normal food and drink that we normally think of as food. And so water and food. And we wouldn't knowingly eat poison or drink polluted water. And so we're fairly clear about that. The third food is the air we breathe. And so we normally wouldn't breathe poisonous air. We frequently live in polluted areas, but we're aware of it and we're trying to do something about it. But the fourth food is one we don't normally think about food, and it's what he calls impressions. So a food, metaphorically, is anything that you take into your body from outside that you then assimilate and that impacts your health, your well-being, your physical state. So impressions are anything that's out there that we take in, and we're taking in poisonous impressions all the time. The media is continually pumping them out. The media wants us to live in fear, wants us to live in anxiety. It's contributing to all of this. So one of the things we need to learn to do is to determine what we're going to pay attention to. Don't just mindlessly flip on the television, pick up the newspaper, read all this stuff. As soon as you realize what it is, then you need to cease and desist from paying attention to it, because it's only then putting impressions that are negative into your neurology. So you got to be aware of what you're looking at, what you're observing, what you're reading. And as I said, it's all the more difficult because the media is continually pumping out negativity, fear. The media wants you to be afraid, and then it's even worse because we're in the middle of a political election, and that one party wants us to fear and negativity and anxiety because they think that'll help them win the election. And so they're doing everything they can to promote it. So we're not doctors, we're not experts. So who are we to believe, or what are we to believe? So all of this impressions that are out there then are designed to create a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the problems we feel. And so we need to be aware of this, and we need to then censor, and we need to determine what messages we're going to focus on and what messages we're going to ignore. And if we focus on all the negativity, then we're going to become basket cases. We're going to be living in fear. We're going to be living in anxiety. We're going to be living in depression. We're going to be living in anger, depending on what our response to the situation is. So we've got then these impressions out there that are enforcing what's happening. This is the narrative, the spin that we continually get on what's going on in the world. And
what about interacting with other people too, Wyatt? So like about social circles, right? I mean, we're talking to other people that might share or have similar levels of consciousness or paradigms, and then we're not paying attention, but then we're entering the conversation. What's your read on that?
Okay, that's an excellent observation, Chris. And you're right on target, because that there are people that are just they're constantly out there searching for negativity and then circulating. And so who your friends are and who you listen to and who you talk to and who you interact with on social media is going to have a great deal to do with what the state of your emotions are and the state of your mental health is. So if, as I said, there are people today that, it's like the latest what is the latest thing we can be afraid of? Oh, the Japanese Hornets that are 2 inches long and that are the most painful sting in the world. And you might immediately go into anaphylactic shock, or if you're stung by several of them, it may kill you. So we put a picture of them on TV. So now we got something else to worry about. So some people are continually searching and for what is the next thing that we can also add to the already long list of things we need to be worried about or we need to be concerned about. So we're Japanese Hornets. They're in Japan. And that they've discovered 2 dead ones in Washington State, and they discovered a nest of them in British Columbia, which they destroyed. So as far as we know, there are no Japanese Hornets, and the likelihood that any of us are ever going to experience one in our lifetime is virtually nil. But we can look on television and we can look on the news and we can see pictures of the Japanese Hornet. And we can see pictures of the idiot who caught one and stung himself with one.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday.
Yes.
Why would you do that?
Exactly. And we can see pictures of a praying mantis eating one. Anyway, so the point is that there's all of this stuff out there, and you go on the so-called news on your computer or on your phone that assembles all of this stuff for you and feeds it to you. And so there's somebody out there searching for all of this stuff and then putting it out there. And once it's out there, there are people that we know that are just looking for this stuff and passing it on. So who you're getting it passed on from and who your news feeds are one of the major sources then of the kinds of anxiety and depression or fear or anger or whatever it is you're experiencing. So
can you talk about sensory acuity a little bit, Wyatt? So let's say I'm sitting out there and I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Pictures in my mind, how I'm speaking to myself, the tonality associated with that, how my body's feeling, and how do I think there's a lot of folks have created a level of numbness in relationship to how they feel, right? Plugging in. I remember when I met you, one of the things that you had said to me, you said, Chris, that's my impression of you, by the way. You're too much in your head. And I'm like, get in your body. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But I remember that. And then later on, I understood what you were talking about. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes. So, okay. So emotions are an on-off switch. What we want, we can't have. So what people want is 2 switches. They want to be able to turn off the negative and turn on the positive, but it doesn't work that way. That you either experience emotions or you numb yourself down. We call it dissociation, where you're not experiencing the emotions. So there's 2 ways then to go through life. One is on an emotional roller coaster ride where you're experiencing the emotions, and sometimes you're high and sometimes you're down. Or the second way is simply to numb yourself, to turn off the switch so you're not experiencing any emotions. So you're basically a numb zombie going through life. And the problem is that most people are one or the other, and that or we go back and forth between the 2. And because that nobody told you that you can turn the switch on and you can turn the switch off. And so that you tend to go through life one way or the other. And so that if you turn the switch off, yes, you turn off the pain, but you turn off all of the joy and the love and the peace and the happiness. Or you can turn the switch on and you can get the love, joy, and happiness, but also you can get the pain. And so the secret is not just to be able to turn the switch on and off, it's to be able to turn it on and then to determine what kind of emotions we want to experience and what kind of emotions we don't want to experience, and then to choose those and to create them rather than letting the world create it for us. So the impressions we take in are going to determine the emotions we're going to experience, and the pictures in our head, the voices in our head, the sensations in our body are going to determine that. And we can either be a victim, which is simply leave that to chance and leave that to what we're encountering, or we can choose to do something about it. And if we choose to do something about it, then we can take control over it. So.
And I think one thing you mentioned, or you did mention a little bit earlier, I think is worth mentioning again and expanding is when Wyatt talked about how emotions are, basically in essence, are time contextualized. So in order for me to have anxiety or fear, I have to leave the present moment, because if I'm going to worry about something, I can't do that here. I got to worry about what can happen, right? So I can create pictures in my head and look at what can happen to me or happen to someone else, or things I can tell myself. So if I stay in the present moment, it's very difficult to have worry, correct, Wyatt?
Yes. Okay, so that's another aspect, and it has to do with emotions have a temporal component. And so some emotions are in the past, such as fear and anxiety. Some emotions are in the future, such as fear and anxiety. Some are from the past, such as guilt and grief. Some are in the now, such as boredom. And most positive emotions are in the now. So Ram Dass is, of course, his famous saying, which became a New Age a mantra, be here now. So when you hear something like that, you go, well, of course I'm here now. Where else could I be? So that's obviously not what he's talking about. So what the hell is he talking about when he says be here now? If you're not here now, then where are you? If you're not here now, you're in one of three places. You're either trapped in the past, remembering something positive or negative that happened to you, and you're trying to relive that, or you're in the future anticipating, looking forward to, or dreading something that's going to happen in the future, or you're in a daydream or a fantasy, which is where most people spend most of their time. So when he's talking about being here now, he's not talking about being physically present. He's talking about being mentally present in the moment, being aware of what's going on inside and outside at any moment in time. And that's what it is to be here now. So a lot of the emotions and don't just come from our surroundings. They come from the fantasies we're creating. And frequently people create fantasies in order to try to feel good. They come from memories of the past, which are positive or negative, or they come from anticipation of the future. And those are the three places that keep us from being here now, and also are frequently sources of emotions and experiences we have. So training yourself, one of the whole basis of mystical training and spiritual training is to train yourself to be here now, to train yourself to be in the moment. And once again, there are schools, but no schools that we can go to that teach these things. So how do you be here now? So the Sufis use sensations in their body. So they're constantly aware of their sensations of blood flowing through the major arteries in their body. And this awareness and constant awareness of sensation keeps them in the now. The yogis use breath awareness. So they're aware of every breath they take. They're aware of a slight warmth on exhalation, a slight coolness on inhalation, and they monitor this. So once again, these things don't happen by accident. They're things you have to train yourself to do, and it's part of being able to be here now, to live in the present. And when we meet people like that, they have what we call a sense of presence, because they are present. They're here in the moment, and they're not somewhere else. They're not lost in daydreams. They're not in the past. They're not anticipating the future. They're living in the moment. And so that's another thing then that's part of the process of beginning to take control. Now we've been talking about emotions. We also need to talk a little bit about thoughts. So that what is a thought? A thought may be a picture. It may be a what we call digital, which is information or the content of our internal dialogue, or like the content of this conversation we're having now. So once again, thoughts are like emotions. They can be supportive or they can be problematic. And so we get thoughts in our heads, and some of the thoughts are good and some of them are things that are not supportive. So how do we control our thoughts? And so for the first thing, since nobody teaches us this, then the first thing we need to understand is that you can't put something out of your head. You can't put something out of your head. You can only put something else in that'll force out what's there. So once we understand that, then it's like the mere act of trying to stop thinking something keeps us thinking it. So we need to be able to, if we want to get rid of it, we got to replace it with something else. We got to replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts. So we need to have then, once again, a bunch of positive thoughts that we can use to replace the negative with. That when we put them in, that it'll drive the negative out. It'll force it out. So that's another part of controlling ourselves in the current situation, is to think positive. We have to be positive, and to be positive, we've got to have positive thoughts, and we've got to be aware of what thoughts we're having. And if we're having negative thoughts, once again, we can't just get rid of them. We can replace them, and we have to replace them by the positive. But if we're not aware of what thoughts we have, then we've got no way of knowing, and we've got no way of replacing them. So once again, everything starts with awareness. Awareness of what's outside the situation, and awareness of what's inside, how we're responding to that situation.